Good evening and welcome. And today we are talking human rights on an international scale. Now, every now and then we hear stories of forceful eviction, violence against people suspected of same-sex relationship. And even though there are no execution or death penalty still on the statute books, despite government having accepted recommendation to abolish it, it still remains there. The criminal justice system remains slow, and last year Ghana was classified as one of the 3 countries for harboring international criminals. Is this the human right image that we are looking to get? No. And if not, then which one are we looking at? Today, my guest is the man who can answer it all, who knows it all. And it's Mr. Mabedle Lawrence Mushuwana, Chairman of the International Coordinating Committee for National Human Rights Institution. And he is my guest today. My name is Nanansa Kwao, and as usual, this is PM Express. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Since you are the first African to hold this post.
Yes.
And I must say, you're a very, very brave man.
Not really.
Now, I say you were brave. Actually, no. I'll leave the brave bit. Let's just talk a little bit about ICC, International Coordinating, and then you basically look after all human rights bodies. What do you do?
Well, as we know, nearly all countries in the world have got human rights institutions. Mm-hmm. So we coordinate those bodies. In Africa, for instance, we have a coordination body in Africa, mm-hmm. in America, in Europe and Asia Pacific. Those are regional structures of the coordination committee. So as a coordinating committee, we coordinate the activities of all of these human rights between regional mechanisms of the UN and the UN system. So we work with these committees in terms of capacitating them, facilitating their access to the UN system. That's what basically we are doing.
Now, how does culture factor into it? Because certain cultures will permit something, certain cultures might not permit something. So you being a central body, do you now have a standard yardstick for everybody, or you allow that flexibility?
National human rights institutions are usually classified or graded, if you want. There are human rights which have A status. In other words, there is a committee, there is an ICC committee which accredit committee into A or Group B. Group A status are those human rights institutions which comply with the Paris Principles. Paris Principles refer to those principles which were agreed upon in 1993, actually adopted by the UN in 1993, which determine the threshold of a human rights institution to qualify as an institution that can participate in the UN systems. So those institutions must comply. So institutions which do not comply are classified under grade B, which means those are the institutions where you find they don't follow the Paris Principle. For instance, some institutions will have officials of government being part of the institutions. Mm-hmm. Some institutions will have, for instance, an act which does not indicate the independence of the members of that particular institutions. That's why you continue to see some institutions in some countries which do not comply with the Paris Principles will have dubious members sometimes who do not command any respect within their respective countries. And that's why they are in the under group grade.
But the reason why I said culture is that, a child in my village, wakes up and walks about, I'd say, 500 meters to go and fetch water before they come to school. Mm. But a child in New York probably just goes to the kitchen and then fetches water So in that case, how then? I mean, am I going to punish everybody in this village? Say that, oh, you're abusing the child the right of the child because they have to go and fetch water, because the guy in New York doesn't do that, and there's a standard measure for all of us. How then does it work?
The standard measure is applicable only in respect of the national human rights institution. In other words, compliance, the ability to hold government accountable. That is the grading. That is the test which the institution must pass before it is called a grade A institution.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the people themselves. I mean, people live in different countries which are at different levels of development. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, in Ghana, which is a developing country, it cannot be equated to New York in terms of certain rights and privileges. Mm-hmm. So we can't equate people per se.
Okay.
But when it comes to, for instance, if you say a child goes and fetch water, well, it depends how old is the child, how far is the place where the child can fetch water. But if it amounts to an abuse by the parents, then that is something that can be seen as a violation of the right of the child, because the child must be given an opportunity to grow. The child cannot perform hard labor. So in some countries they do have a child charter which prevents adults from abusing children.
So if you're then looking at the government as a whole, has the ICC got authority to sanction a government for not adhering to human rights of its citizens? Or
well, the ICC is part of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or the UN.
Okay.
And she has access to, for instance, people like the president, ministers. She has access to the UN, mm-hmm. where all our ministers, our presidents appear. And she can, within the UN system, recommend sanctions at the UN level. Mm-hmm. Our role is to make sure that national human rights institutions become the watchdogs of human rights violation at a national level, in this case within Ghana, mm-hmm. to make sure that where there are violations of human rights, they take the appropriate steps as prescribed their founding statute. Every human rights institution will have a statute to say, look, you can investigate a human right, you can make a recommendation, and the recommendation can be sent to Parliament in some instances. In South Africa, for example, we can. Or in some cases where there is a violation, some human rights institutions can take the matter to an equality court, mm-hmm. where anybody can be sanctioned for having violated a right.
What's the ICC doing in terms of educating? Because we have citizenry where greater percentage are not even aware that my rights are being violated by not giving me this access or that access. I'm sure even by not providing schools for a child to go, because it's a basic. You might be infringing on their rights one way or the other, but there are people who might not even be aware of that. So what's the ICC doing to enlighten people so that they demand their rightful human right?
I think you are right in raising that issue. One of the main functions, for instance, of a national human rights institution is to embark on an advocacy program. Mm-hmm. And as a ICC, when we meet as a bureau, we advise, deal with national human rights institutions, what programs they must engage in. For instance, in Africa, you have got the Africa Network, who will be meeting from tomorrow here in Ghana. They are looking at those aspects, whether national human rights institutions are implementing some of the resolutions that they are taking in their conferences, which include advocacy. Mm-hmm. Advocacy means that human rights institutions must travel countrywide visit people in the rural people at the grassroots level, educate them about all of their rights. If they are not doing that, then they are not carrying out their mandate, because education and advocacy is central to the existence of a national human rights institution. It is one of those factors. If you do not do, then you cannot be qualified to be a grade A national human rights institution.
We have a system where, especially in Ghana, where the police they're doing their well, credit due to them, but they are limited in their resources. So you go and report a matter to the police, and you are supposed to hire a car and take the police in there to go to the crime scene to do whatever investigation, hire a car, and then bring the police back. Now, this is at that top of the ladder. So where would that fall within infringements?
Well, every citizen is entitled to security. The state is supposed to provide security to its citizens. That is the challenge with developing countries, or some others are not even at that level. Because you'll find in some police stations maybe they don't even have a van. There will be a violation, but the challenge is, what do you do when somebody at the police station says, we don't have the money? The country do not have the money. So it's a challenge of a developing country. But it does not exonerate state from not providing that. The state needs to prioritize its resources to make sure when it comes to issues of crime that the police are capable and competent to prevent crime and to make sure that people are safe. Once again, the issue is, if that they are not doing that, then the National Human Rights Institution will still investigate, make a recommendation to Parliament, and as the ICC, if we know in a particular country that is the situation, that is something that we can also approach the High Commissioner for Human Rights to make sure whether that state is deliberately failing its people or those are issues beyond its means.
The other issue, which I think will be a headache in your office, is violence against women and gender inequality, which is always or predominantly favoring men over women, teenage pregnancy, and all that cataloged into one. That must be a challenge, and I want to know if you have any provision in the office to try and promote the girl-child education to, bring that power with the boys?
Well, that is part of advocacy. When it comes to gender equality, you will know that there is the CEDAW committee, which is a committee within the UN, which is responsible to make sure that countries promote gender equality. It is a body which makes sure that there is what we call gender mainstreaming. In other words, in all the departments where we must make sure that in the department there's no discrimination between men and women. People who do the same job get paid the same salary. The only question is whether or not countries are in fact doing that. If they are not doing that, then people or individuals have got a right to approach the National Human Rights Institution, charge in your case, to report that this is not happening in our case. Fortunately, you do have an ombudsman with very wide investigative powers where they can recommend sanctions. So you are lucky as Ghana, because Shiraz is a very strong ombudsman or ombudsperson's office.
You see, we have Shraj, we have Yoko, we have the police, we have a few women organizations who do well, but we still have witches camps, where one is suspected to be a witch, so you are confined to this camp, and sometimes for their own safety, they might as well stay there, because if you come into the community, it might be hell. I think that's a really infringement on somebody's human rights to say that you're a witch, therefore you're confined to this camp.
Well, witchcraft is a very serious crime, not only in Ghana. I think
But
we do have it in in South Africa, for instance, where people in the rural areas in particular, where elderly people sometimes are attacked, sometimes banned, they are labeled as witches. Which doing so is a crime itself. Something that needs to be reported to the police for investigation. It cannot be allowed that somebody is said to be a witch, because there's no proof, there's no evidence that we can use to prove that the person is a witch. Sometimes if I hate a person, I can instigate people against an individual who is my enemy, and the person is banned or killed in the process. So it cannot be allowed. It is a crime. It is a violation of a right to life.
Of course, of course. Which country is your major headache?
Oh, there are just too many. There are just too many. I think in Africa, for instance, there's just too much conflict.
Which one has absolute no regards to human rights whatsoever?
I don't want to put my hand on the block, but I will specifically refer to conflicts all over. I mean, Egypt, for instance, is in a conflict. Tunisia has just come out of a conflict, and we are happy that they are beginning to mend. Libya is coming out of conflict. And wherever there is conflict, there's a lot of violation of human rights. In the DRC, Central, it's quite a lot, and it's a worrying trend. And this worrying trend is exacerbated by the fact that we are beginning to see a number of countries which used to have human rights institutions beginning to change laws or move towards a behavior which suggests that you might not have a human rights institution. Now, I can give an example of Kenya, for instance. Kenya has been a leading country when it comes to human rights. Probably it's one of the first human rights institutions to have had the A status. For the past year now, it has had only one commission in that commission, and the new commission has not been instituted. But I understand it is because the constitution had been changed. They were waiting for the terms of office of the remaining commissioner to expire. But at the end of the day is what happened within a year. Tanzania is going through the same thing. Zambia is almost going through the same thing.
I want to take you back to Libya. You know, the whole AU sat on watch while aliens came onto our continent, went into Libya, had their own reasons, helped overthrow the regime, or there was an uprising there, and obviously they supported it. I mean, that's a clear violation of, Gaddafi's rights, and the whole continent sat by.
Well, although that is something for the politicians, but on a human rights point of view, it's a question which one had thought some institutions should have been able to approach the Africa Court on people and human rights on the attack on Gaddafi. I don't know if anybody has. The problem with the court, for instance, the Africa Court, is it's that you can only do if your country has declared a recognition of that particular court. But the issue around Gaddafi is something that it's a wake-up call for the AU, and actually that matter is where it belongs.
As the head of the ICC, can't you instigate something that, look, go and somebody should have done something,
Yes, we can, where there is a violation, like there was such a violation, because during the process some innocent people have died. But as I've indicated, we have got the Africa Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is directly involved with a situation like this. You see, with us as National Human Rights Institution, you can only operate within the prescribed legislation. In other words, your own founding act tells you how far can you go, how much power do you have. So you cannot go beyond the powers. And that's why there is this grading. You find that some of the powers do not even allow you even to raise a finger. So that's why there is this grading. But the biggest power that you can ever have is power to take the matter to court, take the matter to the ICC or what have you, which many institutions do not have. That is the challenge.
I see. Okay, I'm going to take a break here, and then when I come back, it's going to get very interesting. Because here I have with the boss of human rights. How many times have you heard leaders of African country, presidents, absolutely gay phobia, preaching it that anybody who's homosexual has to be killed or locked up in prison? What are we going to do about that? Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back. We're talking Ghana's human rights record, which way? But generally, all over international human rights. Because I've got the boss here, why should I limit it to Ghana? But just before we went on the break, I was asking Lawrence that, Lawrence, we've heard presidents openly declare, I am not going to accept anybody who indulges in same-sex. Some countries will jail you, some will lynch you, but if it's human rights and they are adult and they are consenting to it, then they have their rights.
I think in a situation like that, we need to look at international law. International law, unfortunately, is not enforceable. For instance, international law say that everybody is equal. We are entitled to equal rights. So including gays and lesbians. They are just as human. But at the end of the day, it is up to a country to decide whether to internalize the convention, the international convention that makes gays and lesbians equal to all individuals. Where that has not happened, then that country does as it wants to do. That's the challenge that we're having.
That's a big challenge.
So in other countries, for instance, there is legislation like in South Africa where it prohibits a discrimination against gays and lesbians. But the irony of it is that much as it's there in the statute books, the constitution, we have had situations where gays and lesbians were attacked, were killed, are discriminated against. We must say that gays and lesbians is a new concept, particularly in Africa. Mm-hmm. It may have been there, and it may have been happening in the dark corners. It didn't come out. It's a new concept. Very few people accept that. Some keep quiet. Mm-hmm. It is very controversial. That's why you have many countries who do not even want to talk about it. So it's an issue that is a bigger challenge. There needs to be a bigger debate. It's a bigger challenge to us as national human rights institutions. We must go and educate people and tell them they are equal. Tell them that they can marry any person that they want to marry. But how will they marry if we are in a country which has criminalized such an action? That's where you have a conflict between national law and international law. So maybe the remedy should come from the UN, because as long as you cannot enforce the UN sanctions, it becomes difficult and people are disadvantaged. You can only charge the people where it is a crime to perform a particular act, but if they prohibit and not kill people. I think my approach really will be to say, look, much as you may not agree with the concept or the practice of gays and lesbians, but you cannot perpetuate violence, commit violence, or incite people to commit violence against such people. Mm-hmm. You don't agree, it's fine, but don't incite people to cause harm to those individuals. I think that's what we must preach as national human rights institution.
But I mean, how has the world not moved on enough for us to accept that it's big enough for all of us to live in it?
Well, it depends.
It's 2013.
It depends on who is the world, who sits in these highest positions. That is a bigger question. Because for me, you can have all the best leaders going to New York and the UN. The point is, what are we doing as civil society, people at the grassroots level? Because civil societies are the people who must hold their government accountable, who must hold their government accountable during the times of elections. People must elect leaders who are progressive. There are certain things that happen because we as the people are not progressive, and in some instances you may be progressive but you don't have the necessary platform to raise your voice. So that's why you have in some countries states which borders on dictatorship. What are you going to do? It's a real challenge. That's why there are no easy answers, there are no easy solutions. And our view as the ICC is that we will continue to preach, we will continue to teach the people what is right and wrong. I remember in some years when I was the secretary of the Africa Ombudsman Association, we were questioned why we were going to Libya, because Libya does not respect the rule of law. And my approach was to say, in Libya there are people, and wherever there are people, you must go and preach their rule of law. And some time to come, people are going to change. And look at what happened thereafter. Whether or not somebody has hijacked the process is something. But we must never lose hope that things are not happening. We will continue to preach the gospel.
Lawrence, since you're the boss, and this plea, I don't know whether it's personal or it's on the behalf of the state or even on behalf of all Africans, but prisoners are not treated like human beings. Prisons that were normally built to hold maybe 500 to 700 people are now holding like 2,500 people. And they are packed in the rooms like sardines. Food is bad. Healthcare is bad. No exercise, no reading materials. I mean, literally really, really bad. So I'm just wondering, since you're the boss of human rights, what can you do to states and presidents or authorities to make sure they maybe build more prisons or send less people in there?
Well, prisoners also have got human rights. When you are in prison, sometimes you are just in a police cell, you are in a waiting trial. And sometimes you are not even guilty. And the principles in many countries that you are not guilty until proven guilty. So that is the starting point. In other words, people who have not been convicted need a better treatment because they have not been convicted. The question is, why is it happening the way you are saying? In many countries, they are not having either resources to build bigger prisons. In many countries, there is a conflict. Other people feel prisoners are treated leniently. They are in hotels, they watch TV. So you have a conflict. Even people think once you go to prison, you forfeit certain rights which are reserved for free individuals. So you definitely lose a bit of your freedom, but you must still be fed. And one fact that is very important, that one day you are still going to be released to go back to society. You need to be reformed. Once you are in jail, it does not mean it's the end of your life. Whatever happens need to be such that you will be able to go back home. It does not always happen that way. That does not mean governments are right in having such very difficult conditions. In some countries, if I was to speak of South Africa, for instance, you have a judicial inspector who visits prison to inspect prisons to see whether that happens. But it's not happening in other prisons. And in such cases, we check what says your law when it comes to prisoners. Because your law will determine what type of behavior must happen in the prison. So if I'm a national human rights institution in Ghana, if I don't follow my law which says if prisoners are ill-treated, I must investigate, issue a report, send it to Parliament. If I don't do that, then I'm not doing my function. It's even better nowadays because when human rights institutions are being assessed for grading, society or NGOs have got a right to approach the UN to say, no, look, this institution is not doing ABC, and therefore it must not be assessed, it must not be given an A status. That is an opportunity that we as civil society have got. Secondly, a lot of countries in Africa go to the UPR, the Universal Peer Review, every 4 years, 5 years. NGOs have got a right to approach the Human Rights Council during assessment to say, this country, Ghana for instance, is not complying in this and that manner, and we think their human rights record it's bad. No country would want to have such record at an international level. When they appear at an international level, the proceedings are recorded, seen all over the world. So if we utilize those UN mechanisms, it does help to reduce such acts of atrocities that are committed by the country. And therefore, as the ICC, we encourage our national human rights institutions to make use of the smallest avenues that they have, which they can use to pressurize government. Because as I've indicated, you only have the powers as prescribed in your act. You cannot do anything. So, but if you can canvass support from other national human rights institutions within the UN, it's something that gradually will make every country to improve its laws. For instance, not every country used to have a national human rights institution. But because of the requirement when they must go for the universal peer review, you find that everybody now begin to have that institution. So gradually we are going there.
The other thing I want to find out, and now not based on Ghana, but I just want to see how it pans all over, is our attitude towards the mentally challenged. You know, from state to individual, the way they are segregated, the way, you know, is it general or is it just us? Because we have that problem. And since you are international, is it an international problem or is it just us? Because we really treat them as second-class citizens, if not third-class.
Well, it's not only us. I think it is the behavior of the citizens in many countries. When we are mentally challenged, even your family tend to disown you. Everyone disown you. And if the state does not have laws that regulate what happens to me if I'm mentally challenged, it becomes serious because I'm left to wander throughout the world. And failure to make sure that these people are looked after, it's also a violation of the mentally challenged. I would agree with you that in a number of countries, unfortunately, that happens to be the case. I've been in a country where, I will not mention the country, where seemingly a lot of dacha is used. And you see some people just lose out. They walk the streets. And you ask yourself, what is the government doing? It is a real challenge. I don't think it's only here. But the question is, in all cases, what do we as civil society do? In other words, there must be activism within civil society. We must keep a watchful eye. If our government is not honoring people, is not looking after people, we put them in power. Why do we put people who do not look after ourselves? Mm-hmm. I think there is a lot that must come from the society. As I've indicated, national human rights institutions may not be able to do something, but NGOs, for instance, might, on the other hand, if there's collaboration, working together between national human rights institutions and the pressure group within the NGO, who will be able to push government. I mean, there are times when they come cap in hand trying to look for votes, and that's an opportunity where we need to utilize. And that is the only pressure that you do. You don't want to stand up and fight alone. You can't fight government.
No.
You can't fight the person who have just established you, but use the means that will enable you to use the necessary pressure that will enable you to continue with the pressure. Particularly in many countries in Africa, we are still far from development, and there's quite a lot of violations.
Well, human trafficking. We have a problem where the northern part is not as developed as the south. So at a certain age, you then need to migrate to the south to come and look for work. And sometimes they come a bit young, they're not, they should be in school, but then they come down south and then they look for menial jobs to do, which is becoming a problem. And I'm sure, all other countries have the problem where, I call it human trafficking, which is also well within your jurisdiction. And how do we fight this?
Well, that is regulated by the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination, and for instance, there is an encouragement, a recommendation from the UN that countries must pass legislation which prohibits trafficking, human trafficking, for instance. Once again, you have a situation where you have a convention which is not nationalized. Because if there is a convention, then government must say this convention is applicable to us. And once we have that convention, it's going to be a crime. But in other countries, for instance, human trafficking can also amount to abduction in other countries, which is a criminal act, which is punishable. So it depends whether, for instance, if we are in Ghana, abduction is an offense. If a person is abducted, then a criminal court must be approached, and otherwise it must be reported to the police. And if the police are not doing anything, that's when you need to report to the national human rights institutions.
For instance, we have another challenge, where now my rights have been infringed, the rules back to front, but access and cost of justice. If you don't earn, a decent wage, you won't get access to justice. Hiring a lawyer, filing your case, appearing in court, and all that could be really, that alone can just deny you access to justice.
Yeah, that can be a challenge in a country where you don't have a legal aid system. In other countries, the constitution clearly stipulates that
we do have a legal aid, but it's getting it.
Getting it. It's a challenge. Whether or not they can refuse you, because if once you have a constitution which says everyone is entitled to a representation, then the legal aid should be compelled to give you money to appear before court. I don't think it's fair to take anybody to a Western court that follows the Western civilization. When I'm not used to such a system, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know that thing. So that cannot be called justice. It's something that maybe we as national human rights institutions need to assist individuals who are confronted with that. For instance, in our case, in my case, as a commissioner, when a person comes and says, no, look, I've been denied legal aid, I'm able to help that person to access legal aid, to insist that good reasons be given for legal aid. I know in South Africa we have had similar cases where an individual had problems in accessing legal aid. I mean, court is a very serious place to be, and if you are not represented, the chances are that you are not going to be able to.
Thank you very much. One last question before I let you go. I think I had two, but I think we can only deal with one. Okay. I was going to deal with the brutalities of the police in South Africa, but I think I'll look at only 10% of people living with disability on our continent have been educated. So 90%, we've just ignored them because they have one disability in one way or the other. That's another huge challenge.
I don't know whether that is by law or
no, it's not by law. I think it's just by attitude. But then states and people haven't made sure that, no, we need to include people living with a disability in educational stream. But we seem to sideline them.
Yes, we do so in spite of the existence of all international prescripts which tells us. You see, whatever you are saying now, it's worrying because we have got people. If you are to go to the UN today, you will find a permanent mission of officials from Ghana. You go to Geneva, you will find a permanent mission of officials from Ghana. And these missions are fully aware that this is the position that needs to happen in our country and is not happening. Now, as national human rights institutions, we are supposed to protect disability. For instance, in our meeting today, one of the strategic objectives that we are insisting that national human rights institutions must put in their plans is precisely on people with disabilities, to make sure that we are there for them, we assist them, to make the necessary application in schools, to make sure that schools do not discriminate against them. Public accessibilities, for instance, to buses, to public places. If you go to town and you don't have toilets which is accessible to a person with disability, it's a clear violation of a right, because people with disabilities will not even come to Accra if there's no facility which enable them to move there. So it's a challenge which we as national human rights institutions, NGOs and the like are faced with. And we need to implement it and to force our officials whom we elect and put into office.
To make sure. Very good. Now, 30 seconds. What are you doing to the police in South Africa with all their brutalities?
Well, we are doing what we can. We have investigated, for instance, one police, like the unrest who was killed by the police. We conducted an investigation. We made a finding against the Minister of Police, which will assist the family in their suit against the police, the attack in the Marikana. We are participating in the commission, in the investigation, to make sure that the finding of the commission must be such that if there were human rights violations, such violations are exposed and that the people who are involved are punished. We are actively involved when it comes to those situations.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
It's been an hour already.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Folks, we've been talking to Mabedle Lawrence Moshuwana, chairman of the ICC, International Center Coordinating Committee for National Human Rights. And it's been insightful. Wish you all the best in your new work.
Thank you.
And as I say, until tomorrow, we'll be back to do it all over again.